Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Iain.
And so am I, and this is still X Month. Yes, we are now midway through Giant Size January, where we are talking all things X-Men. This episode, in an ongoing effort to get my friend to read more comics, we are watching 2003's economically titled X2 and comparing it to Chris Claremont and Brent Anderson's God Loves, Man Kills from 1982. It's not a story with a lot of laughs to be found, but in many ways that makes it the perfect companion to this podcast. Let's get started.
So, like I said to you last episode, I have a comic which is a sequel to the film. I popped it over to you. I'm assuming you've had time to read it. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good comic, is it? So just to be a bit more specific, we are reading a comic called X-Men the Movie Special, published by Wizards of the Coast as a part of a tie-in to a card game. So there's a lot of content in the comic book that is just adverts for the card game, art for the card game.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not the best comic I've ever read, I'll be honest. I mean, it's called X-Men the Movie Special. It's supposedly a sequel to X-Men, although it's completely negated canon-wise by X2. And in fact, it's probably negated canon-wise by X1 as well, considering Toad and Sabretooth both died in that film, and yet here they are in this comic.
I didn't actually think of that.
So, yeah, not much to say about it. It's quite action-led. The X-Men fight the Brotherhood, and then it introduces 6 new mutants, 3 acolytes and 3 new X-Men who then don't appear in the sequels, or do, but in completely different capacities. So interesting at best.
Yeah, it's not great, is it?
What do you think?
Well, couple of good things. I think they captured the film characters well. In particular, Logan and Cyclops' relationship.
See, I didn't think they did at all. I think basically Cyclops was 90s cartoon Cyclops as opposed to the film Cyclops. He was basically, stop having fun.
This isn't a game.
Yeah. And then he got punched by Mystique.
Yeah, it's a very short, very bad comic.
Yeah, although there are some cracking adverts in there, early 2000s adverts. My favourite is, tobacco is whacko if you're a teen.
Yeah, love that one. You did mention about the 7 new characters. A kid called Malcolm, which I assume that's just a kid.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Angel, Colossus, and Psylocke. The other 3 was Senyaka, Cortez, and Frenzy.
Yes.
Are they actually from the comics, or are they new people?
No, they're all acolytes from the comics.
Okay.
The only one there I know much about is Frenzy, I'll be honest. He turns into quite a good character later, but the others are relatively forgettable.
Yeah, such is this comic.
Yes, definitely. I think, in fact, the writer probably forgot what he was doing halfway through writing it. In fact, I noticed that one of the characters at one point says that they are wrecking havoc. The phrase, of course, being wreaking havoc. So I did wonder what Havoc had done wrong to get wrecked, but you know, it just goes to show what happens when you get a movie tie-in like this and a writer who probably doesn't really care.
Yeah.
Puts in minimum effort and says, that'll do. Can I have my check now?
I think that's enough time spent on this very bad short comic.
Agreed.
Should we move on to the film?
So, X2, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, we start off with a fantastic opening monologue from Charles Xavier.
Your favourite?
Strap in, it's another X-Men film. But then, going on from that, the opening scene with Nightcrawler, I mean, fantastic.
Yeah, agreed.
It really does show how powerful, quick, and agile the character is.
Yeah, it's a great way of exhibiting his powers for the viewers at home. Without any dialogue, you've got this initial impact of this new character and what they can do.
Actually, I did have a question for you. Does he have an image inducer in the comics?
He does, yes, at various points.
He does, okay. Because I know that he has it in X-Men Evolution. So I did see that in the scene, he was wearing face paint to hide his blue skin.
Yeah, I was wondering if he was meant to be wearing face paint or what that was really, but okay.
Yeah, I think as the scene carries on, it does start to sort of peel off, or the more he bumps around, it probably sweats a bit, I'd imagine.
I guess so. Yeah.
It sort of starts to come off.
And of course, that isn't the only disguise he's got. He's got the iconic hat and trench coat disguise made famous by The Thing. Completely unrecognisable as long as you're wearing a hat and trench coat.
Well, I think a hat and trench coat hides your look better than a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a hoodie, which is the MCYou's quick hide who I am.
Yeah, although not many people wear trench coats nowadays, so I suppose that gives you away a little bit.
Anyway, going back to Nightcrawler, I think the portrayal by Alan Cummings is actually really good.
Yeah, no, I like what he does with the character. He's not quite as swashbuckling and fun as I think he could be. I know that doesn't really work with the plot they've got going for this film, but that's always been his character in the comics, is that sort of larger-than-life swashbuckling character. I think that if he had appeared in the sequels, he could have been a bit more that character. I think it's actually a real shame that he didn't appear subsequently. Don't know what that was about, really.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved him to come back and to see what they could have done with him. I think in the basis of this film, it works quite well, the fact that he's been controlled, he's got his dark history. You obviously see his religious background come through very strongly.
Yeah, it's an important part of who he is in the comic books as well. But I think you can focus on that, and you can probably emphasise the swashbuckling nature of his, and the sort of light-hearted nature of the character. It's very easy for him to be, because of his looks, quite a penitent and downbeat character. Whereas having him actually be quite light-hearted and heroic is a great contrast to his looks.
Yeah, also, as we know, I've watched more than I've read. Especially in the cartoons, him and Cyclops had that sort of fun but strict relationship.
Right.
So Cyclops is the one who's very strict, and then you got Nightcrawler's the fun one and always sort of pulling pranks. It's a shame that, actually, I don't think that Cyclops even meets Nightcrawler.
No, this is part of my problem with the film, actually. Is Cyclops is, again, sidelined very early on and doesn't really come back until the end when he's brainwashed, and then he snaps out of it for the final 5 minutes of the film.
Oh no, he does actually meet him because he says, "Who's this?" He's like, "I'm Kurt Wagner in the circus." Like, no, stop. That's it.
Yeah, that's pretty much the entirety of their interaction, isn't it? And that's about the most substantial interaction that Cyclops has in the film. So I think that is a shame. It's nice they gave Storm a bit more to do in this film. It was mostly down to her powers. She didn't have much character development or growth. A little bit of interaction with Nightcrawler as well, but yeah, it's moving towards that thing that we spoke about last time, which is the Wolverine show.
Yeah. Talking about Storm then, I realised that her accent from the first one is now completely gone.
Yeah, they didn't bother bringing that back. And likewise, they got her a better wig as well. So
oh, yeah. But yeah, her powers in this, I took from the first one that they were very comic accurate. The fact that she can control the weather.
Yes.
Not make the weather. But then in this, she appears to make wind and ice out of nowhere.
I think in the comic book she can control weather indoors as well, so presumably she can create anything. As long as there is an atmosphere, she could presumably create weather in that area.
Okay, fair enough.
It's not like Pyro, who needs fire to start it. There is always going to be some sort of atmospheric weather condition around you, whether you're indoors or outdoors or what it is, and she can change that, I guess.
Yeah, possibly.
It doesn't pay to think about these things too much, I often find, because as soon as you start querying them, it all goes wrong.
You just said him there, but Pyro, I did like how they didn't change that for the film. He doesn't need his lighter or he needs a flame to control.
Yeah.
It would have been very easy just to turn his character into some guy who just has the power of fire.
As they do with Sunspot. But yeah, no, you're right. And I quite like what they do with his character, having the sort of corruption or temptation of Magneto, you know, temptation towards the other side. Quite a good direction to take with that character. It's nice to see that interaction. It doesn't really pay off in the sequels. He has a little bit of a tete-a-tete with Iceman, but it doesn't really go anywhere after that. But in this film, I think it's quite well handled.
Yeah, he's got the good guy, bad guy, transformation arc. But then you kind of think, was he ever really a good guy? Because even from the first one, he seemed like a bit of a dick.
Oh yeah, he was definitely a bit of a dick. And I think that's part of why it was easy to lure him over. You know, he wasn't a heroic character. He was just at the school because that was the only place for mutants. As soon as he found out there was somewhere else for him, he jumped ship pretty quickly.
Moving on then to the big bad, which I would say is William Stryker.
I too would say that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yay, we both agree on something. In this, obviously, he's a military scientist rather than a reverend.
Yeah, in the comic books, he's a reverend with a military background. In this, he is primarily a military character with a scientific background.
And then he has the control over certain mutants. Is it the fact that he uses his son's brain juice or liquid to control them with?
That, I believe, is what they implied, yes. In fact, outright said.
That's really horrible. Just he's literally farming his son's brain juice and then pouring it on the back of Nightcrawler and I think Cyclops as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to win any Dad of the Year awards, is he? He also lobotomizes his son. I'm not sure if you noticed that. But
yeah.
I think on the grand scheme of things, this is not a nice character.
Not at all.
But he is still a little bit more sympathetic than his comic book counterpart, I would say. The stance towards his son and wife in the film is very different to what happens in the comics, which we'll go on to later.
Yeah, talking about his son then. There's the bit, obviously, when he goes into the fake Cerebro and he makes Charles find and kill all of the mutants. Wouldn't that also kill him? Or is it the fact that because he's in the fake Cerebro, they're both safe from being killed?
Well, I think they were, because Professor X and Jason weren't affected. But also, I don't think Jason cares about that much. He's being brainwashed, isn't he? He's not doing this of his own bidding.
Yeah.
Stryker is fully aware that his son is going to die in this instance, but he doesn't care.
So last week we discussed about the weird clinky noises that happens when Wolverine fights the guy in the cage.
Yes.
And then it just stops for the rest of the film. I couldn't stop thinking about that when I watched X2. And then there's a bit where he fights Lady Deathstrike at the end. Surely they should have put it in there, because effectively they're both hitting each other and they both made of metal.
Yeah, especially after they'd gone to great lengths to show her cracking her knuckles at every available opportunity and that metallic cracking sound. But then I think it would have been very distracting to have that last fight scene if you had just little funny metal clanking on metal sounds all the time.
Ding, ding, bing, bong, bing. I'm gonna get you. Ding, ding, ding. Like some sort of weird, annoying pinball machine.
Yeah. I mean, again, we've got the sort of brutal fight scenes that we don't really get in the MCU. We've got those really sort of bloody people getting shanked up and cut. We see wounds on faces healing up. We see blood pouring out of people.
Yeah, you can really tell that they're trying to make this the most realistic that they can, really, or more realistic than just cartoon fights.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've got two characters whose powers are having knives for hands, so you might as well show them cutting each other up. It's something that never sat quite right with me in the cartoons, is the fact that the amount of times that he would pop his claws and then just punch people or pick them up. And it was like, well, what was the point of doing your claws?
You've got claws, you may as well stab them.
Yeah.
But yeah, what he does to Lady Deathstrike is horrible. Obviously, he stabs her with the injector thing, whatever you call
the
it.
adamantium, yeah.
Yeah, and then just fills her body with adamantium, and then it just goes rock hard, and then she just dies instantly, which, that's a horrible way to die.
Well, she doesn't die instantly either. You see her eyes turn back from that mind-controlled silvery colour to brown. So she actually regains consciousness in her dying moments.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I mean, in fairness, they do show Wolverine actually reacting to that, though, which I thought was quite a nice touch, is the fact he looks away in disgust at what he's just done.
Yeah, it's a kind of like kill or be killed, but then you realise that, hold on, I could have just maybe knocked her out.
Yeah, it worked for Cyclops.
Yeah.
He got knocked out, he reset, he came back as himself. So I kind of feel that that character didn't really need to die, but then, you know, who knows? She could have been evil anyway. Let's say she was a murderer.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, she killed a bunch of people off screen.
Yeah, of her own volition.
What a bitch. What were your thoughts of the non-subtle nods to the Phoenix Force throughout this film?
Well, I think they were building towards something, so yeah, I think it was handled quite well. Little knowing wink for the audience. You had the flame in the eyes, the emerging force around her from time to time, and then obviously the end of the film you have the big one, which is just the giant phoenix shape in the water.
Yeah.
Just to really hammer that home. But I still don't think it means much to people who aren't aware of these things anyway, so it's a little nod for the comic book fans, but in a way that is more subtle than Cyclops saying yellow spandex, for instance. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are like right on the nose. You know, it's like, look what we've got planned. It's coming, and it will be really good, promise.
And it wasn't.
We'll talk about that next time. But I would rather they just have like the little subtle nods, such as the fact that she can't control her powers that well anymore. I think that right at the end, then there's the shadow in the water. Those last bits are just too obvious. It's just like, you can calm down a little bit.
It's probably for more casual fans. It's to get people excited about it, isn't it? It's to give no ambiguity that, yes, we're working towards Phoenix. You know, if that was a Marvel after credits scene, people would lose their minds over that.
Yeah.
But stick it on the end of the film and people think, oh, that's a bit much.
But also, I don't get why she couldn't control the plane from inside.
Plot necessity? I don't know. I mean, she has to stop the water, for which she needs to be stood in front of it, I guess. No, I don't know. There's no real reason for it, apart from the fact that she has to sacrifice herself and be reborn in order to be the Phoenix.
I don't think we can blame that on magnetism this time.
No, probably not. I think Magneto had already left, didn't he? So But I mean, plot necessity, definitely. There was no reason she couldn't have done that from inside the ship, I would have thought. I mean, there's no reason Bobby couldn't have got out there and created an ice wall, apart from the fact she shut the ship up and left him in there. So, and there's no reason, again, she was stopping Nightcrawler from teleporting her back inside at the last moment. Well, why?
Yeah.
You know, why didn't she just let him capture? But again, she has to become the Phoenix somehow.
We've sort of danced around it a little bit, but is there any bits that you don't like about this film?
I think this film gets a pass for me. It is one of my favourite X-Men films. It possibly is my favourite, actually. It's one that combines a lot of different plot elements and brings them together in a satisfactory way. I think it does a really good job with a lot of those things. It has those problems that I have with some of the other X films, such as the sudden and inevitable betrayal of Magneto. But because it's sort of the first one that did it, it gets a pass. You know, they team up with him and he betrays them.
Yeah.
It's going to happen again a lot, and it's going to be less and less enjoyable each time it happens. You've again got problems that we had with the last one, such as Mystique not being able to stay as any other character for more than 5 seconds.
That one is on my list. And the annoying thing that she does with her eyes.
Yeah, she flashes her yellow eyes.
Yeah, we get it, you.
And just like Days of Future Past, she breaks into someone's office and goes on their computer and immediately turns into herself to hack through their computer.
Which makes no sense.
No, exactly. I am disappointed as well that Stryker didn't go the full Lex Luthor and have his IT graphic design department whip up some sprites for each of the X-Men, an individual logo for each one. But he's just not as dedicated a supervillain, clearly.
Yeah, I don't really want to go into my dislike of Justice League and Batman v Superman on this episode.
It may take a while. We're going to have to dedicate a whole episode to that alone, I think, somewhere down the line. What about you then? What didn't you enjoy about this film?
I mean, you've already covered a few of them there. Cyclops being sidelined, the problems with Mystique. And like you said, I do like this film. It's probably one of my favourite of the X-Men films. But watching it last night, I was thinking it is a little bit slow.
Yeah, it's over 2 hours long. And there's that whole scene where Logan goes to Alkali Lake at the beginning. And he just sort of wanders around for 5 minutes in this sort of deserted facility. And then it doesn't go anywhere. He just leaves again. And then they go back there later and he goes, oh, I've been there and it was empty. It's like, yeah, we know. We saw it in painstaking detail.
Although he does see a wolf.
He does.
Which people seem to think is linked with Wolverine.
Yeah, the makers of the X-Men films seem completely convinced that a Wolverine is a wolf.
One other point of the film that I didn't like is Bobby's little brother.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name now, but he's a little shit, isn't he?
So actually I've written down, Iceman's brother is a dick. Ronnie, you prick. And that's all I've got for that section of the film.
Well done. He calls the police. He then lies about being held hostage or something stupid. And then he tells on his brother and the others. It's like, you could have asked them to leave.
He's a knob. Something the film doesn't do particularly well that the comic does is explain why there is anti-mutant hysteria, especially amongst families. I liked the idea of coming out as a mutant being akin to coming out as gay, which is the parable they were playing with.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
Exactly. And I think that stems from Bryan Singer being gay himself and wanting to inflect the film with that as an allegory, you know, the mutant metaphor, which can stand for various things. But then, yeah, his brother sort of phoning the police on him, I felt was just a bit much. But, you know, I think it works for the plot. And I'll give a lot of things in this film a pass because I do generally enjoy it. I think I enjoyed this less than I remembered, and I enjoyed X-Men 1 more than I remembered, which is an interesting twist. But
yeah, I'd say the same, actually.
Yeah, that's good.
So, on that agreeable bombshell, should we move on to the comics?
Yeah, sounds like a good time. So, X-Men, God Loves, Man Kills. What were your first impressions?
It's got a very, very dark and disconcerting storyline. I mean, even the first page or two, you get two kids, Mark and Jill, they get killed in a playground.
Yeah.
So straight out of the gates, you've got a very dark story arc that just appears out of nowhere, really.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't entirely appear from nowhere. It's something that Chris Claremont had built in the comics to a certain extent. This was a little bit more overt. You know, like you say, it's a very bleak start with the two children being killed, but it is reminiscent of sort of real world events that have happened. You know, you think of things like Emmett Till being killed in America. There is precedent for these things happening, unfortunately, and I think that's what Chris Claremont wanted to tap into.
Yeah, we touched on it very briefly in the film about connotations of being a mutant and being gay, coming out as a mutant. Am I right in saying that in the 80s and sort of earlier on, it was more the connotations of race?
It's called the mutant metaphor, and it can actually apply to various different things. And I think it always has done. You know, people have always taken it as a metaphor for sexuality. Race is definitely one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, more recently, disability has been brought into there, you know, ideas of ableism.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a metaphor that can be applied to various different groups.
Yeah, I mean, we've read previous X-Men stories. Obviously, last episode was my crash course in the X-Men history. I didn't come away from that thinking, okay, there's definitely these links to these other groups. But this, you can see links to race or to sexuality.
It's definitely something that Claremont played with a lot more than, say, Stan Lee.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, he wanted to tell larger stories with it. It was always billed as a world that hates and fears them, and he wanted to show that, and he wanted to build on that.
Yeah, it's not just at the start, it's interwoven throughout the whole book, including Professor X being crucified scene.
Yeah.
Nightcrawler bites him, Kitty Pryde pulls out his heart, Logan literally cuts him up, and Storm shocks him by lightning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's quite a violent scene, and that and the themes the comic touch on, I think, are partly allowed for by the medium in which it was originally published, as a Marvel graphic novel, as opposed to a Marvel monthly comic book.
Mm-hmm.
It was published as a standalone graphic novel, which I don't think fell under the same codes, you know, the Comics Code Authority that the monthly comic book did. It therefore can push the boundaries a bit more than the things that you've read before.
Yeah, I suppose that they didn't have to stick to the guidelines of being this fun comic of here's these people with all these powers, look how fun it is. They've gone, right, let's take a more serious look at it.
Yeah.
It does just get darker. There's a bit where Stryker kills his newly born son and then snaps his wife's neck.
Yeah.
And again, purely because his son was a mutant.
Yeah. And this is what I was saying about him being a bit more sympathetic in the film. Admittedly, not much. You know, he still does awful things. He lobotomizes his son. But I believe it's stated in there that the son kills the mother or drives her to madness with his tricks. So he seems to be a man who's been driven to it, as opposed to just a man with an extreme bigotry and hatred of mutants, as this character is.
Oh, yeah, of course. So, we've talked about how dark it is. Let's bring the tone up a little bit. I'm excited to say this is the return of Stevie Hunter. Yay!
She was in this, yes, absolutely. Stevie Hunter was here, but not her Saab Turbo, unfortunately. We're on Turbo Watch at all times. As soon as it crops up, we'll let you know. But yeah, she was. And, you know, I think they played into her race in quite a heavy-handed way, as only a white man can.
Yeah, I was very shocked to what Kitty says to her. I'm not going to say it here.
Good.
But she compares the hatred to mutants to the hatred of race.
Yes, when someone calls her a mutie.
Yeah.
It's something that Claremont did a few times, and he did use that word a few times. I think more often than not with Kitty Pryde as well. So sometimes she gets a reputation for throwing that word out there.
That's not good.
But it's always within this similar context of how would you feel if someone said this.
Rather than outright calling her it.
Yeah. And what did you make of Magneto as a sort of heroic and sympathetic figure in this?
Well, yeah, it was quite nice to see him team up with the X-Men. First time in the comics that I've come across this. Obviously included in the film. So it was quite nice to see him work together with the X-Men. And I don't think that he betrays them at the end.
He doesn't. They have a conversation at the end where they realise that their political ideologies are never going to be compatible, and then they go their separate ways. It's a lot more of a nuanced ending than Magneto betrays them and tries to kill everyone in the world.
I did get vibes of the Days of Future Past comic, where he does work with them, he does help them. And even when Kitty's walking through the rough parts of town, was this shortly after, or can't remember when Days of Future Past came out?
It must have been shortly after, because Kitty Pryde was there, and obviously in that story she's only just arriving at the school.
Oh yeah, of course.
That was New York in the 80s, which obviously was a lot rougher place. I do think the gang that she meets there are a little troublesome in their representation of that street gang of, I believe they're meant to be Latinos. It was bordering on parody almost, but I mean, we'll move swiftly on from that. They all die shortly after that. But yeah, certainly what happens there is not a nice thing. And this is, I think, the excesses this comic is taken to. I think it's quite a dark comic anyway, and Claremont realised he could take this to a darker place than he ordinarily would be allowed. I think that was probably one of the few missteps in this comic books where he takes it a little bit too far.
Yeah, I didn't feel comfortable when I was reading those panels.
Yeah, but generally speaking, I really enjoy this comic.
Yeah.
It is one of my go-to stories if people want to know about the X-Men and want to know about what they stand for and what they stand against. This is one of the stories you can direct them to and say, look, this is the mutant metaphor. It is the X-Men doing what they do best in terms of protecting a world that hates and fears them and displaying the sort of prejudice that are held against them. But yeah, I mean, I've read this before. What did you think reading it for the first time? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, so after reading chapter 1, it does a really good job of setting up the story. It makes me want to read more, which I think for the first chapter is what it has to do. It is dark, it is a little bit seedy at times, but putting that aside, I am drawn into the story.
Yeah, so scenes like where Cyclops and Storm were attacked in their car, were you fooled? Did you believe that for a moment that they were dead?
I mean, knowing comics, no. But if this was the first comic that I ever read, there could be points I'm like, oh no, they've killed off 2 main characters.
Yeah.
That's what they do in X3, but we'll come on to that next time. I mean, you've already spoke about this very briefly, but there's the religious aspects of this comic. I do like how Charles is compared to God, like how he trains the X-Men to mold to his image, similar to how God created man in his image.
Yeah, I mean, this is largely through the mouthpiece of Stryker, and his stance on things like this I don't think are to be trusted.
No, it's a very biased view.
Yes, exactly.
But then that particular panel did stick with me that actually you could say that about Charles, that he is creating these people the way he wants them to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the conversation they have at the end with Magneto, where Magneto is trying to persuade the X-Men to come with him. And he almost convinces Charles to come with him, in fact. It's only through the other X-Men saying, no, we still believe in Charles Xavier's dream, and therefore we will stick with this, not go the other way towards violence and aggression.
Yeah.
But like you say, it could easily be that manipulation from a young age as well. They've only known this stance. They've been brought up their entire life, or most of it at least, by Charles Xavier and being imprinted on this worldview. So you could also argue that, yeah, that is manipulation to a point that they now believe in his ideology more than anyone else's.
As we said, it is a very biased view. That's the way that Stryker wants to portray Charles. But just talking about the ending there, I do like how Magneto leaves the X-Men on a let's agree to disagree terms rather than, haha, I betrayed you again, which is quite nice.
Exactly. He leaves as a political opposition as opposed to enemies. And in fact, he comes back later and joins the X-Men at various points in their history, takes over teaching the school at Charles's request at one point. So something that Claremont always did was try and work towards Magneto as a figure who had his own moral compass and his own beliefs. It was perhaps just his methods that we shouldn't support.
Yeah. There were a couple things, actually, that I was confused about.
Okay, what were they?
Kitty's powers.
Yes.
So there's 2 points in this that I was a little bit like, is that her power? I don't quite understand. She almost like floats up the stairs.
Yeah.
And kind of like guides herself through the banister. Is that a power that she has, that she can sort of float?
Yeah, so basically she can make herself intangible to walk through walls, but also it just makes her completely intangible. So she is lighter than air at certain points. So she learns in the comics to actually be able to sort of almost float or walk upwards through the air because she is not corporeal. She's not physical and she therefore doesn't weigh anything. Almost like flying, but more like walking on air.
Yeah, because again, then later on in the comic as well, she does literally say that she can walk on air because she's phasing.
Yeah.
Which I never really got how that worked, but comics.
Yeah, exactly, comics. I mean, the whole idea of phasing doesn't make any sense anyway. I mean, generally speaking, she's shifting her molecules at a level that means she can pass between other molecules. There's various scientific reasons you could come up for why she can do what she can do, why they can all do what they can do, but none of them will actually make any sense. You've just sort of got to hand wave it and say, yeah, that's plausible.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
And the other one that I was a little bit confused about, I guess, was right at the end, was Chris Claremont setting up a romantic relationship between Storm and Cyclops?
I don't know about that. I mean, Claremont had various relationships between most of his characters. He wasn't fussy when it came to characters being intimate with each other in ways that might seem more familiar than you would expect. You know, most of his female characters were bisexual in some way, the ways they would interact with each other. But yeah, it certainly ends ends on that note of him and Storm, but I don't know if that actually goes anywhere.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if in comics after this they were together as a couple, or that's just like a little hint towards what could be.
As far as I know, it doesn't develop on that much more than that. He goes off shortly after this. As you know, he leaves and then he has his ordeal with Madeline Pryor, gets married. Jean comes back, and so basically that whole thing is sidelined. But yeah, as far as I know, it doesn't go anywhere.
All right.
But on the subject of Scott, you've not read much about him, and his portrayal in films and cartoons has never been that great, in my opinion. So how did you feel about how he was presented here? He's a very positive character. He has that amazing speech at the end to Stryker. He's the one that frees Professor X. He leads the X-Men very much front and centre.
Yeah.
And he's the one who stands by Charles at the end. So, yeah, what do you think about his presentation in this comic?
I think it's actually really good for the character to be portrayed as that leader and the one who is in control of most things, or he likes to be in control. He does care for Charles, and you can tell that they are quite old friends. You know, I believe that if Charles tells him to do something, he will do it. He won't question it like Logan might.
Yeah.
Or other mutants that I can't think of right now. But yeah, so it's nice to see that. I would like to see that come to screen or come into the cartoons where he is the leader and not just sidelined for two films.
Yeah, it's one of my biggest disappointments with all the media we've seen him in is that he is just presented as being the boring one, the stick in the mud. I think it's much easier to make a character like Wolverine seem cool, especially to 13-year-olds. But in actual fact, Cyclops here to me is the most interesting character out of all of these in many ways. But yeah, it's something that never really transitioned to the films. He always ends up as the foil to another main character. I think if you wanted to make him the main character in one of these films, he could easily take up that lead. He could do it in a Captain America way. He could be that sort of character, less charismatic perhaps, but certainly that leadership figure. The leader doesn't have to be boring.
Yeah, I kind of feel that in film or cartoons, they could have Professor X captured or in a coma or whatever, and then that would open the path to make Cyclops the leader and the one who's in charge, rather than being the, no, let's do this, don't be fun, come on now.
Yeah, too often he's the one getting in the way of the rebellious X-Men from doing the right thing and succeeding. I just think it's kind of lazy storytelling in a way. It's a way of having a authority figure to rebel against. And unfortunately, no one likes that authority figure.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, they could have easily done the same thing with Captain America. They could have made him that boring stick-in-the-mud character, which a lot of people, before that film was made, thought he was. But they took it in a more interesting direction. They made a leader who was interesting because he was a good leader. But yeah, that's by the by.
Yeah.
But on the subject of X-Men...
I mean, that's got to be your worst segue to date.
Don't you mean segway?
And on that segue,
let's move on to Ian's favourite segment.
Cue the music.
Ian's egg hunt. Ian's egg hunt. Ian's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you. Thank you for that terrible segue. I'm going to start off with a terrible Easter egg.
No change there then.
Hey. In this film, there is no Stan Lee cameo. How's that for a terrible Easter egg?
That is actually... Yeah, no, I didn't even notice that. It's not a bad Easter egg.
So my actual Easter eggs then, in that case. Hank McCoy. You do see Dr. Hank McCoy in human form.
You do.
On the TV, in the bar.
But he isn't Kelsey Grammer.
No, he's not Kelsey Grammer. He's played by some unknown actor. But apparently they were going to do a scene in the end of it where they saw him transforming into Beast.
Oh, right.
Not sure how true that is. And then my second Easter egg is quite a long one, I'll be honest.
Oh, good.
When Mystique breaks into Stryker's lab or office,
Yep.
She opens up his computer and there's a whole list of names. I'm not going to read out all of them because that will take forever. But a couple of them did catch my attention. Mm-hmm. So they're all the human names rather than the powered counterparts.
Yeah, it would be weird if you had them listed under Magneto and Cyclops and things like that, wouldn't it?
So just a few of them then. So there was John Allardyce, who is...
Pyro.
Yep, in this film. You've got Alison Blair, which is...
Dazzler.
Yep. Elizabeth Braddock.
Psylocke.
Yep, who makes an appearance in X-Men Apocalypse.
And, of course, in X-Men the Movie special comic book.
Oh, yeah, of course. How could we forget? Something that also caught my eye, that it says Cassidy 2. So that would be Sean Cassidy.
Yeah, Banshee, presumably.
Banshee, yep, who's in X-Men First Class. Mm-hmm. And I think his sister, which is Teresa Cassidy.
His daughter, Teresa Cassidy.
His daughter, okay.
Siren,
which she's actually in this film.
She is. It could also be Black Tom Cassidy,
Yeah.
who is in Deadpool 2, I think.
Yeah, in the prison scene.
Yeah.
You've also got Victor Creed.
Yep, Sabretooth from the first one.
Sabretooth, yep, from X-Men 1.
And Origins.
How could we forget? You've also got Robert DaCosta. Sunspot,
our favourite.
Sunspot in New Mutants.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, characters that are in this as well. So Bobby Drake as Iceman. Fred Dukes.
The Blob.
Which is also in that amazing film, X-Men Origins. So under that as well, it says Guthrie 2. So you got Paige, who's Husk.
Yeah.
And you got Sam, who's Cannonball.
Yeah. There are, of course, a lot more Guthries in the comic books.
Mm-hmm. Cannonball's also in New Mutants.
Yes.
You got Remy LeBeau.
Mm-hmm.
Gambit. And then this next one, I had to look up who it was. He's Artie Maddox. He's the little kid with a weird tongue.
Oh, is that who that is it? Artie
That's
Maddox.
Who that is.
Okay. They call him Artie at one point, and I wasn't sure if it was meant to be. There is a comic book character called Artie. I wasn't sure if it's meant to be him, but I don't think he had a little blue tongue.
You've also got Jamie Madrox, which is...
Multiple Man.
Yep, who appears in X-Men 3. Maximoff 2, obviously Pietro and Wanda, so Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Yep. And one that I thought I'd chuck in here as well, because you actually popped him in your pitch last week, Kevin McTaggart.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. Proteus.
Yeah, also known as Moira's son. And then you've got Danielle Moonstar, who is Mirage, I want to say.
Mirage or Moonstar, yeah, she goes by various names.
Which is also in the New Mutants.
She is, yeah.
And then Aurora Monroe, which is obviously...
Storm,
yeah, of course. So that was a particular list of character names.
Yeah, someone had been busy at Wikipedia that day, hadn't they?
Yeah. But also there's a separate screen where you've got all these little subfolders on, which a couple of them that, again, caught my eye was Wade Wilson.
Right, yeah. Deadpool.
Tabitha Smith.
Boom Boom,
yeah. Which I know her from X-Men Evolution. Yeah. Omega Red.
Yeah.
Which is one of the villains from the comics, which I'm sure you know more about than me.
Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain for his real name, but yeah, it's something Russian.
Franklin Richards.
Yeah, Reed Richards' son. Strange, considering they had the rights to Fantastic Four and then didn't put the son in the film, but right.
And then a few other places was Muir Island.
From my pitch last week.
Exactly. The Danger Room, the Brotherhood, the Morlocks, and Weapon X.
So just a bunch of random places and people in named files.
Yeah, pretty much. And there is so many more in there. Alpha Flight, all these other ones that are just sprinkled throughout that screen. For someone like me to pause it and go, that's that, that's that, that's that, and that's
You were
that.
in heaven, weren't you?
It was great. And then to end, like I did last time, on a little bit of foreshadowing.
Ooh.
You all know I love this. So, in the opening credit scene, there is a bit where you see panels start to move around. This is foreshadowing later on when Magneto does the same thing to the fake Cerebro.
Yeah.
When he changes it to, rather than kill the mutants, to kill the humans. I thought that's a nice little tidbit right at the start of the film.
Very nice.
And that's my very long-winded Easter eggs for this week.
It was that one in particular, wasn't it, that got you? But that's what it's there for. That's what you're here for. I have been wondering what you've been here for, but we've now discovered. Thank you very much for your Easter eggs. Shall we get back to the film and the comic and wrap things up? So obviously last week we couldn't really compare comic to film because they were completely different. But this week actually very similar. So in terms of similarities and differences, what are your thoughts on how they transferred this story from the comic book to the film?
Well, yeah, like we've already said, I think the film portrayal of William Stryker is a lot more human. He's a lot more relatable. He's still a horrible person, but he's more human.
He is. He's less overtly evil. But then, I mean, I think the character was initially based on a lot of famous televangelists at the time. And as such, definitely a caricature of that type of person. You know, what would they be like in this X-Men world? So.
He's very over the top.
Yeah, but I think what they did with him works. They've obviously spliced in another plot line, the whole Weapon X plot line from the comic books. They've put that into the film, into the story of God Loves, Man Kills as well.
Yeah, I think that was the sort of starting point of Hugh Jackman trying to be pushed into the spotlight.
Yeah, and in fairness, the last film, that's where it ended. He was off to do that at the end of the last film. So it makes sense to pick up on that as a plot line, but it did take quite a lot of the spotlight in this. And then also then to throw in the Phoenix Force as well, it seemed like they were throwing a lot of different plot lines in. I think it works.
Yeah, to an extent.
I don't think it's wholly successful at all times, but I do think, generally speaking, it takes these different plot threads, puts them into one story and tells it in a way that doesn't feel cramped. And like you say, actually almost feels a little bit leisurely at times.
Yeah.
So reading it for the first time, would you recommend it?
Oh, yeah. I would. As we've said, it is a very dark arc, but reading it as a whole and trying to understand what the X-Men or what the mutants of this world have had to go through, you need to read this particular arc to understand that.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, it is bleak, but it is reminiscent of things that have happened in our world and do happen in our world. And I think in many ways, it's just as relevant today as it was when it was written. And
Oh, yeah,
a
of
lot
course.
of these figures, these charismatic reality figures, are just as prevalent in today's media as they were then. And it's one of these things that always makes me laugh is when people nowadays, they moan about the political slant on comic books. People say, oh, comics have got too political these days. And you just can point to this comic from 1982, so nearly 40 years ago. And then I can point them at a comic book with Captain America punching Hitler and say, point me at a time when comics weren't political.
Yeah. I think they've always had these political tones, some more obvious than others. Going back to V for Vendetta, I mean, that is very heavily political.
Yeah.
But not all comics can be fun and pew, pew, pew. Quick, let's fight this bad guy.
I think a lot of the people who complain about these things probably haven't read a comic in 30 years anyway. It's just something that always strikes me as strange when people make that argument that comics are becoming overly politicised now. But yeah, absolutely, I would recommend this to someone. In fact, I do. In fact, I have for you. Yeah, I think it's a great story arc if you want to know the X-Men. I think there's a few elements that are very heavy-handed, but generally speaking, it's a very good little 60, 70-page comic book that really sets the X-Men in a context that makes sense within a world.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that said, shall we go on to a new segment that we are calling What Would MCYou Do? A special segment for X month where we outline what we would do for our X-Men trilogy if we were introducing them to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Ian, would you like to go first?
Yeah, all right then. So last episode, we set up the 5 points that we're going to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Team, supporting cast, the villain, the pitch, and the post-credits.
Absolutely, yeah. So first of all, pick up where you left off.
Yeah, so my team then from last time do continue into this. So you got Professor X, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, and Angel.
So the original 5 with Professor X.
Exactly, and I'm going to introduce a new character called Longshot.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So when would this film be set? Because obviously your last film was set in the 90s. Mm-hmm. So presumably if it's set in modern day, all of these characters will now be 25 years older.
Yeah.
So are you setting it in the past? Are you setting it in modern day? Are you recasting? What are you doing?
So I've had time to reflect over my sort of time period last time. Mm-hmm. I think I'd set it in the late 90s.
Okay.
So this one would be current. So talking 25 years older.
Yeah.
They would have been teenagers at the time, so they're going to be late 30s or early 40s.
Yeah.
As I said last time, I think that works.
So what would you do then? Would you recast the actors?
Didn't think of that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I would recast or do some CGI/prosthetics to make them older.
So to make them older, so you would cast teenagers and then try and age them up digitally with makeup and CGI?
Yeah, I think that would work more than to get an older character and to make them younger.
Yeah, I mean, they have had some success with that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They did it with Nick Fury and Tony Stark at times, but not really for a whole film.
Yeah. So then going on to my...
But that does, of course, mean that you're going to have a young cast in the one film, the first film, and then have to apply makeup and CGI to them for however many more films they appear in throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Well, with characters such as Beast, I didn't actually say this last time, but Beast would already be in his blue form.
Oh, right, okay.
So characters like that, I don't think it matters too much. Maybe have a little bit of grey within his blue, just to show that he has aged a bit. Yeah, so it would be set in the 2025s.
So post Tony Stark's death, which is where your last film left off.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so move on to your supporting cast.
So my supporting cast, I will introduce a new character called Forge.
Oh, okay, that's interesting, because I'm also introducing him as one of my supporting cast.
Oh, great minds and all.
That's a bit offensive.
There will also be a couple of other characters, but I'll come on to them in my pitch.
Okay.
The villains then.
Yes.
I've gone a little bit obscure, shall I say.
Okay.
The villains, I've chosen an unknown character that I actually found online because I did some research for this, called Arcade.
You didn't know about Arcade?
No. I've not ever read anything about
Okay.
Arcade.
I'm fairly sure he appeared in the cartoons at one point. Maybe it was a Spider-Man cartoon rather than the X-Men. But yeah, no, he's quite a well-known Marvel baddie, I would say, specifically for the X-Men, various forms, yeah.
I would also have Blob.
Okay, right.
They are villains, but they're sort of sideline villains. The main big bad is a character called Spiral.
Right, yeah, and a Spiral.
So there's a little link there with Longshot.
Yes.
Okay.
So not Mojo, because obviously Spiral is generally speaking as a sort of henchman towards Mojo. And Longshot's history obviously really heavily focuses on Mojo as a character.
I'll go through my pitch and then I'll go through my post credits. And then if you have got any questions or comments, leave them till the end.
I will do. Okay.
Okay.
Go for the pitch.
This film opens up with Professor X introducing Forge to the team.
Right.
He's being brought in as the new tech guy. So they're all training and he's hard at work and he's creating tech for the team. It's at this point where Professor X sends off Beast to the Canadian woods to investigate a feral creature.
Ooh.
Okay.
Who could it be?
So then we cut to an old rundown carnival fun fair. It's now all been closed down, but it was like a spot for runaway mutants, which they've all left apart from Arcade and Blob.
Right.
So those are the only two that are there. A portal appears and a injured Longshot falls through.
Yeah.
He's attacked by Arcade and Blob, and then the X-Men appear and they take down both Arcade and Blob and they save Longshot and take him back to the mansion.
Okay.
It's at this point that we find out that Longshot has amnesia and he doesn't know who he is or what's happening really. Professor X tries to help him to regain his memories, sort of similar to the first one with Logan.
Yeah.
But only small fragments come back to him. Later on, a second portal appears a few miles away from the carnival. This is a four-armed humanoid creature, and rather than falling through, she just walks through.
Okay.
So she's got more control. She tracks his previous location back to the carnival where she meets Blob and Arcade.
So they just left Blob and Arcade there.
Yeah, their main mission was to save him rather than to take them down.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so it's at this point where Blob, Arcade, and Spiral all form an alliance. Cut to the Canadian woods. This is where Beast finds this creature. Can you guess who it is?
You say they're feral.
Yep.
You say they're in the woods.
Yep.
You say it's Canada.
Yep.
Is it Wendigo?
It is Wendigo. I thought you would say Logan.
Oh, I was thinking it was Logan. I was just being annoying. I didn't realise.
I honestly thought you'd say Logan. So Beast is tracking Wendigo. However, Wolverine does make an appearance.
Okay.
And I had some time to think about this, and I would like a certain actor to play him.
Oh, okay.
And it's not just because of his first name. Logan Marshall Green.
Okay. He was in Spider-Man, wasn't he?
No, I don't think so. He is the guy that people often get confused with Tom Hardy.
Yeah. No, he was in Spider. He was the first Shocker, the one that Vulture kills.
He was. Sorry, I thought of the original 3 Sam Raimi Spider-Mans. Yeah, so cut back to Spiral and her new allies. They confront the X-Men at the fun fair. Arcade has set up some elaborate fun fair traps, like he does. We see the X-Men fighting Blob and Arcade in these traps. And this is when Spiral confronts Longshot. So he recognizes her, but doesn't quite know who she is, but he knows that he's fought her before.
Right.
The X-Men and Longshot fight Spiral, Arcade, and Blob. Spiral is knocked unconscious and she's captured. However, Arcade and Blob escape.
Right.
They take a badly injured Spiral back to the mansion, and that's when we realise that she's now in a coma. It's at this point that we realise that the battle has woken up some more memories within Longshot, but he chooses to stay with the X-Men. He's now part of the team.
Right.
Cut back to the woods. Beast and Wolverine have defeated Wendigo. Beast offers a place in the X-Men for Logan, but he turns him down.
Okay.
So he doesn't come back to the mansion with Beast, but at least now we know that he's out there.
Right. Okay.
Going into my post-credit scene, this is when we see Spiral awake from her coma. She's still very badly hurt, but has enough power to open up a portal and fall through.
Okay.
She lands on the other side in front of a large beastly figure. We don't quite see who it is, but he is pretty huge, and he says something like, "I see you made it back."
Okay, so then we're setting up for a sequel in which presumably Mojo is the villain.
Yeah.
And do you explore any of Spiral's background at all, or?
At this point, I wouldn't. I'd leave it very open-ended.
Right.
So people are more curious who she is or where she's come from.
Okay. Do you think it gives enough motivation both for the villains, because obviously we know that they want to get back Longshot, but we don't know much more, but also for the heroes? I mean, are the stakes high enough?
Possibly not. I was going for more of an action sci-fi kind of feel to it, in the vein of the first Terminator.
Yeah.
Someone's turned up, they're injured, so the X-Men's task is to save the injured person, and then they realise that these two have a history, and it's sort of cat and mouse.
But the Terminator, obviously the threat of the Terminator was that he was going to eradicate the leader of the human resistance, which would doom mankind. So there was still quite a high stake there, even if it was quite a personal level. So perhaps you should work on something in there as well, a reason that would give some motivation for the X-Men above saving this one man, perhaps. But yeah, apart from that.
Yeah, Spiral could say something like he's coming, or you don't know what's coming or what will happen soon. You know, someone's coming to invade or something along those sort of lines.
Well, I'm a big fan of Longshot and, you know, Spiral, Ricochet, Rita, the history they have. So yeah, I would be excited to see him in a film. That's a good pitch.
Thank you very much. So let's do a little recap before you do your second pitch. How did we end yours last time?
My film ended specifically with mutants very publicly being outed in a scary and menacing way to the public. And as such, I wanted to continue building on the idea that mutants would be hated and feared. So my original team was Cyclops, Iceman, Jean Grey, Storm and Colossus. And that was who it would continue to be. I also have 2 new members, introducing Shadowcat and Nightcrawler.
Okay.
And obviously in my last pitch, I said I wanted a sort of faculty feel to the supporting cast.
Yep.
So I had Professor X, Hank McCoy, Stevie Hunter, all returning for this film, in addition to Forge, the tech guy, as another supporting member, and also Senator Robert Kelly. I'm putting in a supporting cast role, not a villainous role.
Oh, okay.
And I'm actually taking a lot of inspiration from this week's comic book and this week's film, in fact. My enemies that I've elected to go for are William Stryker and the Purifiers, as well as David Moreau, Sacha Ryan, and Nathaniel Essex.
Oh, okay.
So very much humans as the enemy, building on the culmination of the last film's events.
Okay. How would your film start then?
Okay, Germany, then. A stormy night. A terrified woman is hounded by a mob led by a priest who speaks in German of a demon. She carries in her arms a bundle. The woman, cornered on a bridge, takes one last look at her child, a blue demonic looking baby, before casting it from the bridge in a last desperate bid for survival. The baby falls. A white gloved 3 fingers hand reaches up and grabs a trapeze. We transition to present day, where a crowd is amazed by the wunderbar Nightcrawler. After the performance, we see behind the scenes of the touring circus and the family bond between them. Perhaps we see references to Blob or Eunice the Untouchable, other mutants with a circus background. Then the circus is brutally attacked by the Purifiers. The circus folk, they put up a fight but are ultimately defeated. The human circus owner comes to the aid of Nightcrawler but is abruptly killed. And we get a taste of the Purifiers' motivations, as one of them calls them a mutie lover or some such, and says, oh, we should just put them all down. He's then told that they have orders to bring them in alive. So that is how the film starts.
Okay.
We're then reintroduced to the X-Men. We have an action scene with them taking down some rival mutants from robbing a bank or causing upset in New York. Someone like Avalanche and Pyro, I'm thinking.
Yep.
They take them down, they're taken into custody. And although they're successful in stopping them, we get a sense of that building human animosity there as well. They're met by a less than thankful crowd, and they return to the mansion feeling just generally dejected and disappointed by their mission. They are greeted at this point by the latest recruit, a very bored looking Kitty Pryde sitting on the porch of the mansion, and they had all forgotten she was coming.
Poor Kitty.
Yeah. So a few years have passed, and as such, all these characters have aged up a little bit from their late teens, early 20s into a slightly mature role. So I wanted to cast Kitty Pryde at this slightly less mature mutant teenager, essentially, or an older teenager. So we're reintroduced to the X-Men and the school through her eyes, as well as the world itself. So we catch up on what's happened since the last film. Anti-mutant sentiment is growing, thanks largely to tele-evangelist William Stryker and Senator Robert Kelly, who is attempting to repurpose the Sokovia Accords as the Mutant Registration Act.
Okay.
We're introduced to the villains of the film as they have a clandestine meeting between Stryker and his right-hand woman Anne, Robert Kelly and his aide, and representatives for the island nation of Genosha, David Moreau, Sacha Ryan, and Nathaniel Essex. Genosha offers the services of its Gene-gineers to help with the mutant problem. We go to the second act. We learn that mutants are being shipped to Genosha for experimentation, including the captured Pyro and Avalanche from earlier in the film, as well as a captured Kitty Pryde. We learn that Genosha is a fascistic state that lobotomizes its mutant population and forces them into labour, and that their Gene-gineers are experimenting on something. Robert Kelly believes this to be a cure for the mutants, but Stryker knows that it's a lethal virus that will target only mutants, at one point referring to it as our legacy. When Kelly learns of this, he tips off the X-Men. He's not happy. He didn't want a virus released on the populace. He just wants what's best for humankind. Mm-hmm. So they go after Kitty, who by this point has met Nightcrawler. Much like their original appearance in the comics, she is initially afraid of his appearance, but over the course of the film, they become close friends.
Yeah.
I'm in two minds whether to include a subplot wherein Hank McCoy is also captured and experimented on, which results in his blue appearance.
Okay.
Lead Gene-gineer David Moreau is killed by the freed mutants, and the X-Men return to New York with Kitty and Nightcrawler to confront Stryker, who plans to release the virus at a rally. This plays out very similarly to the comics, including learning about Stryker's origins, and the X-Men confront Stryker, particularly Scott, who gives the initial public speech, as well as Kurt, who is obviously a very visible mutant, but with a highly Catholic background. Mm-hmm. And we also have the not visible at all mutant Kitty Pryde, who is of course Jewish. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the crowd turns against Stryker. He is taken into custody, and the virus is not released, but is also impounded. And so that would be the flow of the story.
Okay.
I actually have two end credits, so mid-credits and end credits, let's call them. Mm-hmm. Mid-credit scene, Senator Kelly laments his losses. His aide, seen earlier, suggests that they move to Plan B and hands him a dossier. Kelly looks at this and he says, what did you say your name was again? To which his aide replies, Trask, sir. Bolivar Trask. We then see the dossier detailing what is referred to as the Sentinel Project. After credit scene, Sacha Ryan, now the lead Gene-gineer after the death of David Moreau earlier in the film, returns to her office to shelter from the chaos that has erupted in Genosha with the escaped mutants. She is confronted and killed by Nathaniel Essex. He, of course, has his own ulterior motives and has been conducting his own personal experiments to augment himself into something all the more sinister.
Well, there you go. Yeah, so sort of continuation of the story that you set up in your first film. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like it actually. Yeah, so it's I've sort of gone a bit otherworldly. You've stuck to the sort of human aspect.
Yeah, because I think you started with that human aspect, didn't you?
Yeah.
So you can sort of build from there. Whereas I wanted to keep it within the mutants in the first film and then spread to the humans. And I had a sort of globe-trotting idea in the first one, which is they go to Kenya and Russia and Scotland and, you know, all these different places around the world. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted to have a bit more of that in this film, which is why I thought Genosha would be a good spot whilst setting up for later films with some of these other elements.
Okay. So you said there was the meeting in Genosha. You said the characters that you wanted to be there. Would there be any other characters that aren't necessarily related to the mutants? Thinking of how the MCU's been created so far, would you have someone from Wakanda there? Someone from S.H.I.E.L.D. there?
Not necessarily in Genosha, but yeah, I think you would have to build in elements of the greater MCU into these plot lines. Mm-hmm. The Purifiers, for instance, I was thinking could be a lot more technologically advanced, hence why they would be more of a formidable opponent for the X-Men. So they could use Stark technology or technology we've seen before, repurposed. Yeah. So we could see elements like that, you know, from the greater world. Likewise, I could see with Senator Kelly's plotline, him being surrounded by S.H.I.E.L.D. members and political and government figures like that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, I like it.
Good. Oh, thanks.
Any casting ideas for your characters apart from Dev Patel?
I think for Nathaniel Essex, who obviously Mr. Sinister in subsequent films, I would want him to be an ongoing villain. So I was thinking someone British, someone of a pedigree, a decent actor. Someone like Jason Isaacs, he might be a little bit old for that role by the time we get around to it. I was imagining him as a sort of a slightly younger figure, but I'm not the best with that sort of thing. But
I just had a thought that came into my head. Someone Someone like John Hamm, maybe?
John Hamm, funnily enough, was cast supposedly as Mr. Sinister in New Mutants and then was cut. But yeah, potentially. I mean, I don't know how good his British accent would be. I like to keep him as an English character if I could, or British character as I could, and allude to him being older than his appearance would otherwise dictate.
How about one of my favourites? David Tennant.
Perhaps, maybe. I don't know. He's more wiry than I was expecting. The ideal casting for me for that role would be Alan Rickman. A Robin Hood age Alan Rickman.
Hans Gruber.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that would be the ideal casting for Mr. Sinister. He's got that real scenery-chewing flamboyantness that you need for that character, I think.
You could just splice in scenes of Die Hard within your film and no one would even realise.
I doubt they would. So those are our pitches. Let us know what you think and let us know what you want to see for X-Men in the MCU.
Yeah, if you have any comments of what we've said or what we didn't say, do please send them across to us on Twitter or Facebook or by email.
And if you have any questions about our pitches or just for the show in general, please do send them over. We will be restarting Ask the Teapot once X month is over. If you enjoyed X-Men God Loves, Man Kills, then, as mentioned in a previous episode, I simply cannot recommend Claremont's Uncanny X-Men run enough. Whilst not everything he wrote over his 16-year tenure on the book can reach the same heights as this or Dark Phoenix Saga, Claremont built and shaped the X-Men into pretty much everything that they are today. As mentioned, you can send your questions and comments to us on becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweet us at becometheteapod. Next episode, we conclude X-Month on a high as we discuss the aforementioned Dark Phoenix Saga. Published in the pages of Uncanny X-Men 129 to 138, the iconic storyline is the culmination of years' worth of events involving the now infamous Phoenix Force. So, of course, there's only one film that we could talk about in relation to this seminal storyline. What? What do you mean they did it twice? Well, did they do it any better the second time at least? Oh. Well, either way, we'll be watching 2006's X-Men The Last Stand.
That's all from us, Bob.
Sorry, I unplugged my headphones as you asked that question.
It's alright, just had a thought.
Did it hurt?